All right, welcome everyone to the Assignment 4 Workshop. Um, Thanks for being here. Anyways, let's get started. So I'm going to assume that if you're watching this video, you have already read the assignment specifications. If you haven't, then go please check them out. Um, so this assignment has a lot to do with MVC and with Java effects. Those are the main concepts that you're going to need to know for this assignment. And I would highly recommend that you learn what those things are before you do it. Now, I think you can probably kind of wing your Java effects stuff, but you definitely need to know MVC before you start. And I have some resources to help you guys get started. I have them here as well. One of the things I would definitely say is if you don't know MVC well, you definitely need to know it. So please check out the professor's lecture video. I have some timestamps that might be useful to you if you check out 15 minutes to 30 minutes and 50 seconds. And then you check out 37 minutes to the end. I also have those times here as well. Um, right here. So I would definitely recommend that you figure out what MVC is before you start the assignment. It's going to be extremely difficult to get this assignment correct or to even understand what's going on if you don't watch this first. So you have to understand MVC first, okay? Um, for the JavaFX stuff, you can, as long as you understand MVC, you can probably wing all the JavaFX stuff as you code it. Um, there is a video here that shows you how to set up JavaFX, like so they can run on your computer. Um, Also, you can check out, by the way, you can check out chapter 6 on the textbook to learn more about MVC. So this chapter here, it has some examples as well. Um, yeah, so check out that out as well for MVC. And for JavaFX, like I said, you can check out this video by the professor that will let you figure out how to set it up in the first place. And then you can also check out this chapter, chapter 5 in the textbook for sample code and explanation on how JavaFX works. So there's a ton of sample code here that you can check out. Also, we're going to be checking out some example code from the professor from the lectures. So right here as well, we're going to be checking this out. Not only for this assignment workshop, we're going to be checking out this address book app, and address book view. But if you're just trying to figure out how JavaFX works, yes, you can check out this stuff, and yes, this is almost a almost complete in everything that you need. But there's also other examples here that are a little simpler that you can also check out, like this one. All right, you can check these out. This is the most basic one, right? So pretty much. So check that out too if you want to figure out more about JavaFX. But yeah, definitely, you don't have to know everything about JavaFX before you start the assignment, but you do need to know MVC. Okay, like you do need to know that. So don't even try the assignment without understanding MVC first, right? You're just gonna be wasting your time. Okay, cool. So let's get started. So this assignment um, is gonna have you practice MVC, and obviously the idea with MVC is you have right a model, right? In this case, it's going to be the electronic store. Now, the nice thing about this is that you guys are already pretty familiar with the electronic store, right, from previous assignments. Then you're going to be creating the controller, and this is provided, but you have to add some stuff. The controller you're also going to be making is called the electronic, or actually, is it electric or electronic? My bad. Yeah, it's electronic, not electric. Electronic, and the controller is going to be called the electronic store app. Okay, and the view is going to be called the electronic store view. Okay, so these three things are going to have to work together in order to get your GUI working properly. And you need to know how these things are supposed to interact. Okay, because just knowing about their existence isn't enough. You need to know how they're supposed to interact, like on a theoretical level, right? Because you have certain stuff like the model and the view, like this sort of link is kind of like they don't really talk to each other that much, right? Like if the model's talking to the view, it's probably going to be through the controller. Oops. It's probably going to be through the controller here, right? So you need to understand that, right? The model is going to have the variables, right, and the objects, and it's going to have the important functions, right? And meanwhile, your view is going to have the update function, the also important update function, right? When update is called on the view, it reads in the model whatever data is here, right? And the update makes sure that the GUI looks like whatever's here right now, right? That's what update does. And then you have the controller, which is going to be in charge of the handlers, right? And it's also going to create the model and the view, right? So these are important things to know because you may think that you're doing it correctly, but then you may put it in the wrong class, right? Like the code that you're writing, right? So that's not good. Make sure you understand MVC first, okay? All right, great. So moving on. Um, all right, so the first set of instructions talks about the GUI. All right, here I have some notes. Um, so in blue here, we can see you're gonna have to have three list views for your GUI. You're gonna notice that the whole thing, all of it, is contained inside of a stage, right? So to set the title of the window, to set the size of the window, right? That's all gonna be the stage, right? The buttons, obviously, button here, 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 and here, 4 buttons in total. The text field is going to be these guys here, 1, 2, and 3. This is going to update all the time. I don't think it's really meant for you to actually put anything in here. So it's not input, right? It's not input. It's more like output, right? These text fields here. And then obviously you're going to need labels for all of these things. So these are going to be just standard labels. Um, and yes, um, obviously you're going to have some event handlers. You're going to need event handlers for this, because those things are things you can click on. You're going to need event handlers for all of these buttons, obviously, right? So when you click on this, that does something. When you click on that, that does something. This does something when you click on it. 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 So, maybe actually I'll just go ahead and highlight that as well because it's pretty important, right? These are all things you're going to have to be able to interact with, right? All right, cool. So, also it's important to mention that there was no such thing as a cart before, right? So you're building off of assignment 3, but there was no such thing as a cart in assignment 3. Also, there was no such thing as a popular item, right? So these are things you're going to have to change, right? Okay. So make sure you think about that. Um, and you should think about whether or not the cart stuff should be in the model or not, right? Okay, cool. All right, so moving on. This next part here, yes, so this next part here, um, very quickly, let me just check I'm not missing anything from the, oh yes, I am missing a page. One moment, let me just pause the video and import that in. All right, so sorry about that. I had to quickly recreate this page. I lost it for some reason. All right, so here, the second page is going to start talking about what the GUI needs to do. Okay, so at first, we're going to talk about, it talks about the controller. Okay, so when we're talking about the electronic store app, we're talking about the controller, right? When we talk about creating an instance of the electronic store, we're talking about the model here. And when we create an instance of the view, right, that's going to be the view obviously, but that's going to be called the electronic store view. There's no name there actually, so I might as well put it there for you guys. All right, something like that, right? And notice that your controller is the one that's going to be creating the instance of the model and the instance of the view, right? So the controller is the one making these two, right? So we'll add that to our notes. Oh yeah, we have that right here, right? Create the model and the view. Okay. All right, cool. Also, you're going to have to use a static create store method in the model, which is just going to create a store, something that you had to do in the previous assignment anyway, I'm pretty sure, so, or one of the previous ones, so that's fine. Okay, cool. So when the application starts, so when the controller is run, right? When you run the main function of the controller, you're going to be creating the model and the view. And when you create the view, you need to make sure that the stage that it's on has a title with the name of the store. So that's this thing here, right? That's done by the stage object. Okay. Um, and obviously this is going to happen inside of the view, right? Then you have your buttons will be initially disabled. Now to disable a button, I'm pretty sure that's a very simple function that you can do to just call it, make it disabled. So that's pretty easy. Um, your text fields are going to have to be initialized to some value. That's going to happen in the view. Um, and your store stock is going to have to show whatever is in the model, right? So these list views you have here, right? They're going to be things that are represented from your model, right? So your model is going to have this information and this information and this information, and your view is just going to display it in the list view, right? So that's why I have here the model, right? Because the model is the thing that's going to store all this information, right? But the view is the one that's actually going to display it, okay? Your controller is the one that boots up the view, which then displays what's in the model, right? Okay, cool. All right, so moving on to the event handling instructions. I have some notes here that you may want to take a look at. The event handling should happen in the controller, right? Uh, Typically, you're going to have the controllers defined like sort of like in your main function, and all of those controllers, it's nice form to have them call another function somewhere else in the controller, which I'll show you an example of that. But anyways, either way, your event handling needs to happen all in the controller. The updating of the GUI, right, should happen in the views update function, right? So I mean, there is a thing you could have it so that the view has a bunch of functions that you call from the controller when an event happens, but that's usually not the best way of doing it. Usually the best way of doing it is having the controller, like it handles the events, right? Which then will update the model and then tell the view to update itself. Usually it's a lot easier to do it that way. I mean, there's sort of like an idea where you could have it so that like the controller calls a bunch of functions in the view, which actually updates the GUI, but it's not good form. The best form is to have an update function in the view, right? And this update function in the view will update, you know, will update the list views, right? It will update the text views. It will update the buttons to be either enabled or disabled. It will change the labels that you need, right? That all could happen from within the update function of the view, right? generally speaking, it's better formed to have that happen in the update function in the view, rather than having a function that can change the label and a function that can change the button and a function that can change the text view, and then having the controller have to call all of those things every single time. It's usually a lot easier to just update the model and then update the view, right? So if you know that like you need to add something from the stock to the cart, that's a simple function that you can do, that you can call in the model, and then you can tell the view to update itself, for example, right? Okay, so that's why I say like whenever you change the GUI at all, it should pretty much always happen through the update function of the view, right? Like you really don't want to be micromanaging the view from the controller's point of view, right? You just want to say, hey view, update yourself to what you should look like now, and you handle that, right? It's the view class's responsibility to make sure that the view looks correct, right? So, and all of that can happen from within the update function of the view, right? So it's a lot more organized to say, hey, view, you go update yourself, and that way I don't have to micromanage you to change all of your individual little things, right? Just tell the view to update itself, right? So all of the GUI changing should be happening in the update function really for the view, right? And whenever you need to change those major variables, like whenever you need to like change something about a product, right? That should be happening in the model. You shouldn't be having like multiple copies of a product, right? Like in no way, shape, or form should you have the same product represented in both the view, the controller, and the model. That's horrible. That's really bad format, right? You need to have all of those things be in the model, right? So you have a model which has a representation of the products and representation of maybe the customer. Maybe you have a representation of the cart or something else. Like you have the model representing a lot of things, right? And whenever you want to change how the data of those things, you tell the model, hey, this is how I'm going to change that data, right? So that then when you call update, all the update has to do instead of the view is say, hey, I'm going to look at the old model, right? See what's up there, and make myself display whatever's going on in the model, right? Rather than having like multiple copies of the same object across 3 different classes and then having to keep them all up to date, and then like changing one class that triggers another class. Like that's a lot more complicated than if you just have all of the important variables inside of your model, which you then update with the controllers of handlers, and then whenever those handlers end up changing the model, the update gets called on the view, which then redisplays whatever's supposed to be whatever is supposed to be on the screen, right? So that's the general way you want to solve that, right? All right, cool. So here I have in red what should be a event handle, and I have here in light purple, so red, light purple, in light purple what should be happening through an update function, right? Now, because it's sometimes, it can be confusing, right? If you have a button being clicked, right, what happens then, right? Because obviously, if you're clicking on a button, an event handler needs to go off, right? Because a button has just been clicked, right? And you need to handle that event, right? But then what exactly happens from there, right? You have the button being clicked. Ideally, that's going to then result in you changing the model and then you calling update on the view, right? Now, sometimes though people can get a little bit lost in the weeds there, because sometimes what they'll do is they'll have the button being clicked, they'll have the button handler, and then from the button handler, they're changing the view, right, directly, right? Or they're changing the model directly in a sort of like weird way where they're not letting the model take care of it, right? Remember that you can't have all of the code in one class, right? So you can't do that. When you click on a button and the event triggers, right? The event handler triggers for that button, you need that button's handler to tell the model about what just happened, and then tell the view to update itself. You shouldn't be micromanaging the model and the view from the controller that much, right? So it's not like a button is clicked and then you from the handler in the controller go into the view and change some labels, right? You probably shouldn't do that. You shouldn't have like a button being clicked and then like you go in and you change the list view, like all from the same function, all from the same handler in the controller, right? You should instead change what needs to be changed in the model and then tell the view to update itself. It is the view's responsibility to make sure that it is displaying the thing, the model correctly. It is not the controller's responsibility to do that. So you can't micromanage the view from within the controller's point of view, right? So when a handler it goes off, you need to figure out like what do I need to change about the model, and then just let the view update itself. You can't be micromanaging it, right? So this is why I have here in red, these are things that you definitely need an event handler for, right? Like when a button is clicked, you need an event handler to handle that button being clicked. But sometimes, like in that handler, it's a lot easier to just say, hey, I'm going to change the model, and then I'm going to let the view do the rest, the view's update function, right? Rather than trying to do too much in the handler, right? So let's do some examples, right? So the first one is if an item has been selected inside of the store stock list view, right? So that is if I'm using this GUI and I click on, let's say, this one here, right? Like what should happen, right? So obviously, that's an event. You need an event handler for that, right? Because what you need something to happen when you click on this, right? So that's code, right? That you need to run, right? So that's an event, and you have to code it in the event handler, and you have to do that in the controller, right? But when you're actually coding that, you need to make sure you don't do too much inside of that function, right? So when you click on one of the products inside of the in the stock, right, and you call this handler, what needs to happen? Well, the add to cart button should be enabled, right? So you need to this is something you need to like think about, right? So do you want it so that like when the handler triggers for this event, do you want to just go into the view and tell it, hey, turn on the button, right? Or do you want to change something about the model that will have the view change it later in the update? Now, in this is one of those cases where it actually it might be feasible to just go right from the controller and tell the view, hey, enable the button, right? Because you are kind of micromanaging the view at this point, but it's a very small little thing, right? That you could handle in one line of code, right? So even if you had a function in the view that was just like disable or enable the button, you would still be only calling it like doing one line of code, right? So probably maybe in this case it'd be more feasible, right, to micromanage the view like that. But there's always something like a trade-off, right? You have to think about this, right? So, but yeah, anyways, in this case, you're definitely gonna have at the very least an event being called, right? You're gonna have you click on one of these, right? And an event handler is called inside of the controller, right? Which then enables or disables this button, right? That's the first part. And you need to figure out exactly who do you want to have the responsibility of enabling and disabling this button, right? Okay. Next, we have another event. This is the add button being clicked. So you first click on this, it enables this button, and now let's say you click on it, right? So you need another event for that, right? This needs to be a different event handler code that's written in the controller, right? So you click on this, right, after it's enabled, and it should add one of the things or the thing you just clicked on to the cart, right? It needs to add the thing to the cart, one of them exactly, right? So you need to think about this, right? Like How are you going to do that exactly? So firstly, when you do that, what is the result going to be when you click on the add to cart? Well, you're going to take one of these things, you're going to put it in here, and then, well, now the list view has to have that product. This list view here has to update itself because sometimes it may delete the thing that you just added because it's out of stock now, right? And then all of a sudden, because there's things here, you're gonna have it's gonna be possible to click on one of these things and then click on remove, right? And I think that your complete sale button will be available at that point, right? The moment you add one of these things from here to here, your complete sale button is going to be enabled, right? So you need to be careful about how much micromanaging you're doing of the view, right? Like, think about it. Like, is it a good idea to enable or disable the complete sale button from the event handler that is handling you clicking on adding to cart, right? Because there's a lot of stuff that I just described there when you click on add to cart, right? Like, you need to move this product here to this list view. You need to you need to update this list view. You need to update this list view. You need to, and sometimes you update this one, right? So, and also, I'm pretty sure that sometimes like this add to cart button itself will be disabled because like if you added the last thing that was in the stock into here, then this button wouldn't be available anymore because you're not selecting it anymore, right? If you added all of them here. So you need to not get overwhelmed here because this is a lot of things that you could potentially do from this handler. So again, remember what MVC is supposed to be, right? You need to let the view be responsible for displaying the stuff. You need to be the model. You need to have the model be responsible for storing the stuff, and you need the controller to be responsible for connecting those two things together, right? So you can't do too much micromanagement of the model or the view from the handlers. So is it actually a good idea to, for example, disable the complete sale button from the handler of the add to cart feature? I don't know, right? But one thing that I will say for sure is you need to abuse the fact that the view will have an update function, right? So the view, right? If the view is told, hey, display this model, and the model currently has something in the cart, right? Well, then the view, when it's doing the update, it knows that, hey, I have something in my cart, so I can probably enable this thing, right? And so if you have your add to cart button like handler go off, and all you did was put something in the cart from within the model's point of view, then all you would have to do is call update on the view, and the view would know whether or not this thing should be enabled, right? And it should know what this value should be, for example. Because that's another one I didn't mention, right? Like when you add something to cart, not only do you have to update this list view, and potentially update this view, and potentially update this add to cart, and potentially update this button, but you also need to update this, like this number value here. So there's a lot of things you'd have to that have to result like from you pressing add to cart, but it doesn't mean that all of those things that would result from you clicking add to cart have to all be coded inside of the add to cart button handler, right? This is the beauty of MVC, right? So maybe it would be better, right, if you had it so that when you clicked add to cart and the add to cart event handler goes off, you don't want to do that much micromanagement of the view, right? You just want to say, hey, like, I'm going to update the model so that this is in the cart now, because I know that happened at a minimum when I pressed add to cart. And then you tell the view, hey, re-update yourself based on what the model looks like now. Instead of having to go to the model and saying, hey, change this, and change this, and change this, and change this, and change that. That's probably a lot of micromanagement to do, right? So just update the model and tell the view to update itself afterwards, right? So here I have in purple, right, when you should probably just update the model, right? So here, right, and in red I have when you should call an event, right? So or an event handler. In the case that the add to cart button is clicked, definitely you need an event handler there because you need some code to execute when add to cart is clicked, right? But exactly how much you need to do is going to like exactly what happens next is going to should be a responsibility of the other classes, right? So here, your professor says see requirements for a cart button below, right? Because these are all of the things that should happen as a result of you adding something to cart, right? These things, right? Like your one list view needs to change, right? Then the second list view needs to change. Then the add to cart button may have the complete sale button be changed or not. That's exactly what we're talking about here, here, and here, right? And those are the minimum. I mean, there's definitely like the cart, this thing you're gonna have to change as well. So yeah, that should probably be happening through an update call to view, right? Not through a bunch of small micromanagement changes to the view class, right? It should just all happen through one function call, right? View.update, right? Okay, so moving on. Uh, This next part here talks about if a product does not have any items left in stock, it should not be displayed in the store stock view. So that means that if I am selecting this one and I'm clicking add to cart a bunch of times, eventually there's going to be there's going to be too many things that I've added to my cart here, right? Like there's not enough fridges left, right? Because I think by default you have like 10 of each. So as soon as you hit add to cart on one of these things 10 times, it should no longer be displayed here, right? Because like the store is out of that, right? So this is kind of tricky again because now if you're trying to do all of that from the add to cart by itself by micromanaging everything, you have to do some really weird stuff if you want to get that to happen. Right? Like you would have to say, okay, I clicked on this thing and I clicked on add to cart. Now I need to figure out like how many there's left here and then like how many times I'm allowed to click add to cart and like moving them over. That's kind of complicated, right? So what you really want to do is just have a system where when the add to cart button is clicked, you just tell the model, hey, I've added this thing to the cart, right? And then let the model take care of the rest. You don't want to micromanage the model either, right? So you don't want to calculate how many of the things you have left in as part of your stock in the model from the controller's point of view. Like the controller shouldn't be telling the model how much stock it has of each of the things in the store, right? Like the controller should not be keeping track of the fact that you have 4 fridges left, right? Or that you have 3 toasters left, right? Or whatever, right? Like that's not the controller's job. That's the model's job. So you can't micromanage the model that hard from the controller's point of view, right? Because otherwise this gets complicated, right? Now if I'm clicking the add to cart button, I need to all of a sudden remember like how many there are of each thing, and then like that's something that the model needs to do, not the controller, right? So it'd be really nice if you just were able to tell the controller, or sorry, the model, hey, I want you to add this thing to the cart. Like I want to be able to do like something like model dot add cart, right? Like this ID, right? Like think of how nice something like that would be. Because now you don't have to worry about like how exactly that works from the controller's point of view. That's just something that the model needs to take care of. And now that you've done that, right? Now that you've called that thing on the model, the view knows what to do automatically. Like the view knows whether or not to take out one of these things in the list view. Why? Because the if you coded the view correctly, the view is going to take the model and go, hey, I've noticed that like this product has quantity of 0, so I'm not going to display it. I'm not going to add it to the list view. And so then that happens automatically for free, right? You don't have to code that from the add to cart handler, right? Like imagine how annoying that would be is if like you had to make it so that like when the add to cart handler goes off, the controller has to look at the model, see how many it has left in stock, calculate whether it's at 0, and then if it's at 0, go to the view and delete a thing, right? And then add it to the cart. Like that's a really complicated if statement that you don't need to have if the model was the one that was keeping track of everything, right? Because as long as you told the model from the controller's point of view, hey, like get rid of this one item, now it's gone. It's just gone from the model. And so when the view updates, it knows it's gone because it can't see it. So it won't even add it to the view in the first place, right? Okay. So that being said, okay, all of these requirements could be achieved if you just had a smart model and a smart view, and you wouldn't necessarily need to even code this like via an event handler, right? Because if you have it so that like you're able to remove things from the model, like you're able to remove stock from the model with just a simple function call, right? And if you're able to make it so that like the view, when you call update, will just remove things that aren't there anymore in the model from the list view, then you don't have to do anything else for the handler. All you'd have to do, which is because that's already handled over here, right? All you'd have to do from the handler's point of view is remove the product from the model and then update the view, call update on view. And the view would then look at the model and say, oh, like that thing is gone now, so I'm not going to even print it like onto the screen, right? So again, like this whole thing could be done, right, with a combination of the model and the view update function, and you don't even have to do anything else from the handler's point of view, right? Okay. Next part is this current cart here. So that's going to be this list view. All right. So here we have some instructions that like it should display the amount of things that you have in the cart, basically, right? So if you have like 3 of one thing, you should say like 3x that, whatever, right? So how do you make sure that this list view always has the correct stuff on it? Simple. You make sure the update function for the view is coded correctly, right? If you have the update function in the view coded correctly, then this list view will always be correct, because every time that the model changes, you're going to call update on the view. The view is going to look at the model and say, oh, there's these many things in the cart. Well, I'll update my cart, right? So you don't have to have, right, like a bunch of logic for figuring out whether or not you should delete something or not from the cart inside of the view or inside of the handler. Because when you delete something, right, or add something, that's a simple function call that is made to the model via the controller. And when you need to, and then you call view, or sorry, you call update on view, right? So there's no need to then have a bunch of complicated code that like deletes things from this list view and then adds it back in. You just have code that changes the model and then code that draws the view based on what the model currently is, right? So again, this entire thing can be solved, right, without putting a lot of code in the handler, right? It can be done with a combination of making sure that your update function is correct and your model is correct as well. Okay. So the second thing here is the complete sale button, right? So this button here, right? So this button needs to either be disabled like it is now or enabled if you have things in your cart, right? And that's pretty much the whole thing. But again, this is going to be something you need to think about, right? How are you going to enable and disable this button? Are you going to have it so that like this button is enabled and disabled based on whatever happens in the handler here? Like, are you going to make it so that like the handler for add to cart, the code itself the handler itself enables or disables this. Is that actually the best way of doing it? When you could instead make it so that when you call update on the view looks at whether or not there's things in the cart, and based on whether there's things or not in the cart, it enables or disables this button. That would be much simpler, because then you don't have to have a bunch of code in your add to carts event handler, which then turns this thing on or off. You could instead have this thing just be on or off automatically based on whether there's things in the cart, right? And you're going to make that check every time you call update, right? So you call update on view, and the view goes, oh, are there things in my cart? Oh, there aren't? Okay, I'm going to disable this. Oh, there are things. Okay, I'm going to enable this, right? That's a lot easier of a system than having the add to cart event handler decide whether or not this thing should be enabled. Because then all of a sudden it has to like look at the model and see like, oh, are there things in here, and then decide based on that, and that's just a lot more complicated. Okay, so again, this could be done with just making sure that your update function is smart. All right, so the next part here is the total dollar amount. So this is going to be this thing here, right? And basically, the dollar amount that shows up here should be the total of all of the things in your cart, right? And if you have something in your cart that has multiple, so for example, if you have like 3x toasters, right? Then you should take the base price of one toaster multiplied by 3, right? And then add that on to your total, right? So it should be like the total of all the products and the amount of each times the amount of each one, right? So this is again one of those things where if you're trying to make sure that this label is always correct, it would be easier, right, to have it so that the view always displays the correct number here. It always displays it, and it's going to make sure that it does that by constantly refreshing this number every time we call update. Right? So every time we call update, we look at the cart, we see how much it costs, and we update it. Right? We update the view. Now, again, you could have some really complicated thing where you have the add to cart and the remove to cart together, or together like changing this thing, right? Now, that wouldn't be great, right? Like you could do that, right? Like, you could make it so that like when you click the add to cart event handler triggers, and then, well, you know that something's going to be added to cart, so you know this number is always going to go up, right? So you could make it so that like when you click add to cart, the event handler triggers, and the event handler goes to this view component and tries to increase it, right? Based on whatever you just added. That would be really complicated. Well, and then if you did that, you'd also have to make it so that the remove cart does that too, right? So every time you hit remove from cart, it launches a handler in the remove from cart, right? And then that handler, it knows you're removing something, so it knows this number must go down. So then you could like figure out what you're removing and then do the math to like decrement this, right? So basically every time you click add to cart, you increase this element, and every time you remove from cart, you decrease this visual element. That is really complicated, right? Like you have to add a lot of function, a lot of code inside of your handlers to do that, right? An easier way of doing this, right, would be to make it so that like every time you add to cart, you update the model, right? So that the model is aware that there's something new in the cart. And then when you remove from cart, you update the model again so that it is aware that you've just removed something from the cart. Then the model will always be up to date, right? The model will always have, like you'll always be able to calculate this amount from just the model. So then your view update function could just look at the model and see what the dollar amount is supposed to be here, and then just update itself, right? That would be a lot easier, right, then having the add to cart and the remove to cart actually, like our handlers, actually manipulate the GUI, right? Instead, you probably want these GUI elements, or sorry, these handlers to make a change to the model. Then you call update, which then will actually update the GUI, right? The viewer will do it in that case, or the view class, right? Okay, so again, this is another requirement that can be fulfilled with a good update function and a good model, right? Rather than some like weird jerry rigging that you're doing from the handlers, right? Okay. Next is um, if an item in the cart has been selected, then the remove cart button should be enabled or disabled, right? So that's, I click on something here, and then this is either enabled or disabled, right? So um, just like this first one here, it is up to you exactly how you want to do that. Now, I mean, I guess you could have a thing where like the model is aware of what you have selected. And so then when you click on something, you let the model know that this thing is selected. And then based on like that, the view will then change. But this is one of those scenarios where it would be pretty simple to just have it so that like when you clicked on something here, it just enabled or disabled this button, right? So you click on something here, it enables it. You click away, and it disables it, right? I mean that would be not too difficult, right, to do. So I mean it's up to you if you want to do it that way. In that case, it would be pretty simple. That would be like one line of code, right, or a couple of lines of code, right? So it's feasible in that case. You just have an event handler such that when you click on this thing, the event handler just enables or disables this, right? So, because in this case, it just be like one line of code, right? You're kind of micromanaging the view a little bit, but it's not too bad in this case. So next example is if you click on, okay, so we just remove the cart. All right, so this is like if you actually click on the remove the cart button. Right, so if this button's enabled, right, and then I actually click on it, right, then what should happen? Okay, so what happens when I click on that button is the cart should be updated, right, such that it is reduced by 1, like the item is, and the quantity in stock should be decreased by 1. Right, so um, again here, right, you probably want to update the model in some way, right, because this is complicated too, right? Like when you click on remove from cart on one of these things, it not like the same thing won't always happen twice, right? So maybe the first time you click it, like you click remove from cart, maybe it removes one of the things, like one of the quantities in here, right? So like maybe in your cart you have 5 toasters, right? And so when you click on remove from cart, it's going to change this to 4 toasters, right? But sometimes you'll have 1 toaster in here, and you'll click on remove cart, and it won't just make it go from 1 to 0. It'll make it go from 1 to 0, and it'll remove the entire entry from the list view, right? Because you no longer have that in your cart, right? If you have 0 of something in your cart, that thing is not in your cart anymore. So it shouldn't even show up here anymore. So you see, what's going to happen when you click remove from cart can change. Sometimes when you click on this button, it will decrement the amount of things there by 1. And sometimes it will decrement it and remove it from the list view. This is complicated, right? So if you're trying to write the remove from cart handler, because you definitely need a handler, right? Because you need some code to run when remove from cart is clicked. When that handler runs, you need to be careful what you do next, because it's not simple, right? It's not simple. Sometimes you're removing from the GUI, like the whole like item, you're removing it from the GUI. Sometimes you're just editing what's on the GUI there, because you're like decrementing it by 1, right? And sometimes but either way, like that's not complicated. That's not easy. That's not one line of code, right? Like you should try to have your handlers be like a couple lines of code, right? So that's not a simple thing for your handler to take care of. So maybe, right, this is something that you should get the model involved in, right? So if you clicked on this, right, and then clicked on remove, and then you went to the model and you said, okay, remove, like model dot remove cart at index whatever ID, right? All of a sudden, this remove cart function that's in your model can handle multiple cases. It can handle the case of there only being one thing in here, or there being like four things in here, or that thing not even existing, whatever. Like it can handle all of that, right? So it'd be nice if you had that so that like when you clicked on remove from cart, you told the model, hey, I need to remove this thing from the cart. The model then goes, okay, I'll remove it from the cart, right? And so it changes itself, right? So that the thing is no longer in the cart, or at least has one less thing in the cart, right? Then you tell the view to update itself. And the view goes, oh, check this out. I no longer have this thing in my cart now because the model says so. So I'll just wipe my cart and put whatever's on there again, whatever's on the model. Just I'll display that, right? So that would be a lot easier, right? Like you have, like you click on remove from cart. It calls the handler remove from cart inside of the controller. That handler runs and it tells the model, hey, like I need to remove this thing that's selected from the cart, right? The model then changes it so that that's no longer in the cart, and now you're done with the model, right? And you're still in the handler, and now you say from the handler's point of view, you say, hey, view, update yourself. The view update runs, and it goes, oh, that thing's no longer in the cart, huh? So then it doesn't display it anymore, right? That's a lot more simple than having this remove from cart have to do all of this by itself. Because otherwise, the remove from cart is going to have to think about whether or not the thing you're trying to remove has more than one thing there, and whether or not it should remove it from the list view or just update the thing in the list view, right? And then like it has to do all of it all by itself, right? So you don't want to do that, right? You want to use the MVC pattern as much as possible here to save you time. All right. Okay, cool. So next, we're gonna look at the complete sale button, right? So here it says, if the button is clicked, those items should be sold. Okay. So again, this is one of those scenarios where you want to do a lot of your work through your update function, right? Like if you make it so that like, right, like because there's two ways of doing this, right? Like the naive way would be to have it so that like when you click on complete sale, the complete sale handler goes off in the controller, and then you try to do everything by hand. So then you go, okay, there's like X number of things here in the cart. I'm going to calculate how much that is. I'm going to like put it over here. I'm going to update these things. I'm going to update this thing so that like it's all empty. And then I'm going to go back up here and change this thing. And then I'm going to like disable this button. That's a lot of stuff to be doing from just one handler, right? Yes, the handler needs to result in all of those things happening, but you don't need to code all of those things in the same function for the handler. That's what the MVC comes in from, right? So it'd be much better, right, if when this button was pressed, you just told the model, hey, I need to complete my sale, right? So hey, model, take care of the cart of selling everything in the cart, right? So now the model goes off. It does that. It sells everything in the cart, right? And then all the view has to do is call update, right? Because now the view goes, hey model, what's going on? Like, what's in my cart? And the model now goes, oh, your cart's empty. I just emptied it, so it's empty. And then the view goes, okay, it's empty, so I'm going to make it empty now. And then, oh, because it's empty, I'm going to make the complete sale button also disabled, and the remove from cart button also disabled, right? Just automatically, because I know that if there's something in the cart, these things should just be disabled anyway, right? A lot more simple to do that than it would be to have all of the code exist in the handler for the complete sale. So don't do that. Make sure the complete sale communicates that the sale is happening to the model. The model will then update itself, and then you'll call update on the view, which will then update itself based on what is currently in the model. Right? So yes, most of this stuff you could solve by just having a good update function, right? And then here, obviously, you're gonna want to change the actual underlying model, right? So the event handler goes off, right? It changes the underlying model, and then it calls update, which will then display the thing as correct according to the new model, right? Okay, cool. This next part, the total dollar amount listed in brackets beside current card should be reset to 0. Right, so that means that this thing should be reset to 0. Now, to be fair, that is probably something that's pretty simple to do from the event handler. Like, it would be one line of code that just sets this back to 0. So I mean, it's tempting to do that from the event handler, but again, if your update function is written really robustly in your view, there's no need to even do that, right? Because your view should always be your view's update function should always be trying to keep this number up to date, right? So if you're calling update on view and view goes, oh hey, like there's nothing in my cart, it should just set this thing to 0. So like you wouldn't, if your view's update function was written correctly, you wouldn't even need to have this be set to 0 directly from the handler. But to be fair, that's only like one line of code, so not too bad in that case. But I'm just saying, you can save on time if you did your update correctly. So yeah, you could do this from the update, just having a good update function, right? Okay. Now this list view, so it's this list view. Now the most popular items. Okay, so this one is actually like a really good example of what I've been talking about this whole time, right? So this list view, it needs to contain 1, 2, 3 items, right? The 3 most popular sold items. Now, how do you make sure that this list view always displays the top 3 most popular items? Well, one way would be to completely overload and completely have way too much code in the handlers. Right? So you could make it so that like every time you complete a sale, you figure out in the handler for the complete sale, you could try to figure out like if these things need to be updated, and then you could change it by hand. Right? So I mean that you could do that. Like you could make it so that like when complete sale is clicked, the complete sale handler goes off in the controller, and then because that goes off, the controller knows that like this could be changed now because like there's a new sale, so these could be different now, and so then the controller could then like try to calculate what should be here, here, and here, and then make calls to the view so that it does that. That would be insanely complicated. Like you'd have to do so much code in one function. Like you'd have to compute like how many things were sold of each thing in the store, and then you'd have to like rank them in the top 3, right? And then you'd have to go back to the view and change it. That's a lot of work, right? Which is why it would be easier, right, to make it so that like every time the view's update function is called, these are just set to whatever they should be, right? So maybe you have it so that the model is aware of what the most popular item should be, and every time you call update with the view just looks at the model, right, sees what the most popular things are, and then just updates its GUI accordingly. Right? That way, you don't have to have any other code in the complete sale. Right? So complete sale goes off. It tells the model, hey, I need you to make the sale. The model makes the sale, and after a sale is done, it internally figures out which popular items are the most popular items, right? Because that happens every time a sale goes through, right? Just from within the model, and then the view has its update function called, and it doesn't have to figure out which things are popular items. It just asks the model, hey, which items are the most popular, right? It takes those and then just displays it. You see? So that's a lot easier than just trying to do all of that from one function, from within the complete sale function, right? Like you could have it so that every time you click this button, the event handler goes off. It figures out what you sold. It figures out if those things now need to be if this needs to be changed because of it. It then goes to the view and then changes all of these, right? That's really hard. That's a lot of code. You don't want to have that much code in your handlers. It'd be much better if this handler just told the model, hey, like I made the sale, right? And then the model goes, oh, you made the sale. Well, cool. Now I know what the newest popular items are. I'll just update myself so I'll remember. And then you go, okay, cool. Thanks, model. Now I'm going to tell the view, hey, view, make sure you update yourself based on whatever the model's doing. And then the view goes, okay, I'm going to update myself. It looks at the model and it goes, what are the most popular items? And then the model tells them, and then it updates itself. And then that's it. You're done. Right? A lot more simple. Okay, so again, this whole thing where you have the popular items, that could just be updated every time update is called in the view, right? Rather than having a bunch of complicated handlers try to update that for you, right? So yeah, and this talks about how if you have two or more items that have an equal number of units sold, then you can display any of them. Like if you have two of them that are tied or a few of them that are tied, you just pick some of them at random until you have three. And then this other part talks about how the popular items list should only account for items that have actually been sold, not the items that are currently in your cart, because those haven't been sold yet, right? So if you have a thing that's never been sold before, but there's 10 of them in your cart, it should not be over here it should not be over here, right? Just because it's in your cart. Okay? All right. The last part is the reset store button. All right. Sorry about that, guys. My mic just cut out there, but I'm back. All right. Cool. So, great. So now we're talking about the reset store button. So what happens when this button is pressed? Okay. So, when reset store is pressed, that means that we go back to our initial values, right? So the cart is emptied. The number of sales that we made is reset to 0. The amount of revenue we've made is reset to 0. The dollars per sale number is reset to 0, right? Your popular items are reset to just random stuff, and all of these stock items go back to 10. These buttons get disabled again. This goes back to 0. Now, if you coded it, the reset store button, in the way that I just described, it's going to be immensely complicated, right? That's not how you want to do it. So you don't want to make it so that when you hit this button, you literally go and you disable this one, and you disable this one, and you disable this one, and you empty this, and you make this back to 0, and then you set all these back to 10, and then like you set all of this back to normal, and then you set this back to 0, and this is 0. You don't want to do it that way. Okay, because again, you're doing too much stuff from the handler. You're micromanaging the view, and you're micromanaging the model. That's too much to do from the handler. What would be better is if you had this reset store. Again, you're going to have it so that this handler updates the model, right? In this case, what are you trying to update it to? You just want to reset it back to normal. So all you have to do really is from the handler is say, hey model, I need you to wipe yourself and go again. Like give me like set the model equal to the starting version of the model, right? That's it. That's all you have to do. Because then your update function, when you call update again, right? Your update should then go, oh, okay, well, what's my model looking like now? It looks at the model and it goes, okay, well, this model has nothing in its cart and the total of that cart is 0 and it has these many things in the store stock and each of them have 10 and this is 0, this is 0, this is 0, and then the view would just automatically wipe itself in that case, right? Effectively. Because all you've done, right, all you should be doing from the reset store button is you should be going into the model and saying, hey, you need to reset yourself. So you need to just wipe yourself off of RAM and recreate yourself all over again, right? The very same way that you existed when we first made the program, right? Because when we first made the program, it had 0 sales and 0 revenue and NA dollars per sale, and it had these things in the stock, and each of them had 10, and there was nothing in the cart, and the price was 0, right? So if you just told the model, hey, wipe yourself off of memory and give me back the thing that you were at the beginning, that's all you should have to do, because the model, or sorry, the view should then be able to say to go, oh, okay, well, now that I need to update myself and I have this view, what do I need to make myself look like? Oh, there's nothing in the cart. Oh, there's these things in the store. Oh, like this is the sales and the revenue. And it'll just make itself equal to that, right? Because remember, the view's job is to display onto the screen whatever values are stored in the model. So if the model values all of a sudden change so that they're all 0, the view should instantly update to display that. And there should be no sort of logic for that, right? Like it should just be pretty straightforward. Like I have these many things in my cart, I display these many things in my cart, right? There shouldn't be some sort of logic that like keeps track of like the difference between like what used to be there and what is there now, and like you have to update it. No, you don't want to do that. The view just displays whatever's in the model, right? So if the model shows that it's a brand new model, the view will display a brand new model. So there's no reason to have this reset store, for example, disable the add cart button and disable the remove from cart button and disable this and set this back to 0 and wipe this thing and refresh this thing and put 10 things here and refresh this and change all of these guys. No need to do that whatsoever. The store, this button, should just update the model so that it goes back to a blank version, and then the view should have its update function being called, and that update function will just look at whatever's in the model and display that, and that's it, right? So if you have like more than a few lines of code in in your handler for your reset button, like for this part here, you're doing it wrong because you're not understanding how MVC is supposed to work, right? The controller makes a change to the model, and then the model is changed, and then the controller tells the view to update itself based on whatever's in the model at the moment, right? You should not have the controller be micromanaging the view, and the controller should also not be micromanaging the model. The controller tells the model what's up. The model recalculates itself, and then the view just displays whatever's in the model. So you should not have a bunch of complicated code for your reset store button. It should literally be as simple as you tell the model to wipe itself, and then the view updates itself based on what the model is, but now the model is wiped, so it wipes itself. You should not have a thing where the reset button is micromanagingly resetting the view and micromanagingly like resetting the model. That shouldn't happen at all, right? It should be as simple as possible. Okay. All right, great. Cool. So that's us going through the instructions. Okay. So now let's go through some examples. Okay. So I already talked a little bit about this, but again, I would definitely recommend that if you're still not super convinced of how MVC is supposed to work, then just go ahead and watch the lecture from your professor at this timestamp. Let's look at an example. All right, so I'm just finishing up the video from last time. I thought I lost all the recordings, but thankfully it was saved on the temp file. I don't know why my video recording just crashed. All right, cool. So I want to take a look at this example from your professor. It's from the Graphical User Interfaces lecture code zip that you can find on Brightspace. And from this folder, you're going to see the MVC folder, the address book app, and address book view files. This example is almost exactly what you need to do for the assignment. Okay, so if we take a look at it, let's take a look at it. So here are they right here, these three files. These are the important ones to look at here. So this is pretty much exactly what you're going to do for the assignment. Okay. So here, instead of it being address book, think of it being as electronic store, right? So this would be your model, electronic store. This would be your electronic store view, which you also have to do for this assignment, right? And this would be your electronic store app, right? So this would be your model, your view, and your control. Okay? Okay, cool. So look at this, right, and compare it to the code for that you're given. It's almost exactly the same, right? So like if you look at this model and you look at this model, well, in this case we have an array of people, but in your case you're going to have an array of products, right? Right? Here you have an add person, but here you have an add product, right? Here you have a method, a static method that returns back a copy of the model, and this is a static method that gives you back a copy of the model. Right? So it's very much the same thing. All right, so here you notice, right, you have your model, right, and it can do a bunch of stuff, right, and then you have your view, right, which you're gonna have to code. And here, look, it has almost all of the components we need. So if we look at the components that we need, right, so what do we need? Right, we need a list view, right, so there's a list view right there. We need a label. Let's see, are there any labels? This is made of an address pane, which has text fields and labels. So there's a label. You're going to need buttons. Here's buttons. You're going to need text fields. Here's text fields. You're going to need a stage, obviously. So in this case, actually that would be in your controller, I think. Yeah, your stage. That's in your controller. But yeah, that has all of the same GUI elements that you'll need, right? This view, right? And this is pretty much how your view should be set up. I want to bring special attention to how this view in this example has a constructor that takes in the model as an argument, right? It takes in the model as an argument, right? It sets its model equal to that model. It creates all of the GUI elements that it needs, and then it calls update. And here's that update function I was talking to you about, right? Notice how this view is literally just the visual elements that we need, the constructor that initializes all those visual elements, a bunch of getters and setters for those elements, and then the update function. That's literally what your assignment should be, okay? Pretty much, right? So here, the update function, how does it work, right? The update function grabs an array of people from the model, an array of names from the model, and then it makes all of its visual elements equal to what those things are, right? So notice that if I, in between these update function calls, if I change what the model was so that it was a completely different model, when I call update again, the update will result in me displaying something that looks correct to that new model. So it's not like I'm remembering old versions of the model or old stuff about the model. Every time that update is called, I basically wipe myself and start over, right? Based on what the model looks like right now. Okay? So take a look at this update function. Okay, and this control class here, which is going to be your control class, right? This is where all look how like all of the handlers are here in the controller, right? They're all right here. And I want you to notice something that's really interesting. Well, actually, before let me back up a little bit. So here we have our start function, which is basically our main function, right? Like main just calls start or launch, I mean. And well, it calls launch, which then calls start. So this is basically our main function for all intents and purposes. And here we set our model equal to the create book static class. So in this case, it would be, in your case, it's going to be, like electronic store, right? Because electronic store has one of these create stores. It's going to be electronic store dot create store. Your view is going to be the same thing, new like electronic store view. Maybe you want to pass in the model, that's optional, but that's probably a really good idea. And then look, all of your handlers are defined here, right? So for everything you could possibly click on, right? They're all defined here. Now, I want to bring special notice to how these are coded, because these are coded in a really nice way. Notice how like the way that these are coded is that they just call another function, right? So this handles, like, it's not like we have a bunch of code here, right? It's not like we have a bunch of code here. Instead, it's organized better than that, because it calls another function, right? So that way you can define your handler in one line, or like, well, 3 lines of code, right? It just calls another function, so that's pretty nice, right? So, and all the functions are defined down here. That's pretty nice. Maybe something you want to do for your code as well, right? So if you're gonna have like, your electronic store, you're gonna have like a bunch of handlers for like, the reset button, or like the add to cart button. Maybe those, you just have it coded so that it calls another function, which is just like defined down here. That's like really nicely formatted, right? So in this case, we have like these handles: handle add, handle remove, handle save. You probably want to do this same type of thing. And look at what happens every time that we do this, right? So look at handle add, for example. Look at the general format, right? We make a change to the model, right? And then we call update on the view, right? So that's pretty much all of them, right? So for handle remove, it's gonna be the same thing. We make a change to the model, and then we call update, right? We make a change to the model, we call update. In this one, you just call update. You don't even have to change anything in the model. So this one too, right? So this is what I was trying to say to you guys, right? You don't want to have too much code inside of these handlers, because these handlers should not be micromanaging the model, and they should not be micromanaging the view, right? So technically, look at this add person, right? Like we could have done this, right? So like I could have gone here, right, and just copy pasted all this code. So instead of having this here, I could have just done that, right? I could have done like, just like model dot this, right, and model dot that, right? Now in this case, obviously we have some encapsulation, right? So you'd have to go in here and make these public, or have setters and getters that you do this with, right? But like, this idea could have, like, is doable, right? Like I could have done this, right? I could have done this, right? And this would be just name, I think, or something like this. Person P, right? So it would have been just that, right? So like this, I could have this, or I could have this. Don't do this. So like, don't do this, right? Do this. Why? Because you don't want to micromanage your model from the controller. You also don't want to micromanage your view from the controller. Again, for the update function, I could have done the same thing. So I could have gone here, oh boy, and I could have literally just grabbed all of this code, right, and just put it here, right, and just made all of these public and stuff, right? So like, that's not a good thing to do. Like, you shouldn't do that, right? Like, Don't micromanage the view um, from the handlers, and don't micromanage the model either. Okay, and your solution should pretty much be exactly the same as this one, exactly the same thing as the prof gave you here. All right, so yeah, you'll notice your professor does it correctly, right? Like your professor has it so that these handlers, they change the model and then the view gets updated. They change the model, the view gets updated. Change the model, the view gets updated. So make sure you do that too. And in these examples here, we didn't have much time to go over it, but you'll also find all of the small little bits of code that you need. Like I said, this view includes every single type of element that you'll need for your assignment. So if you want to figure out how to add a button, it's here. If you want to figure out how to do a text field, it's here. The list view, it's all here. It also shows you how to add handlers for all of those things, right? Like here, right? Shows you how to make it so that like something happens when you click a button. It makes it so that like you can see all the code for like how to change elements, right? It's all here. So yeah, take a look at this example because it's pretty much exactly your solution. All right, great. All right, well, thanks so much for watching. Thanks.